Hello everyone, I am Ayush Garg, a student at GIIS Smart Campus. To say I am a tech enthusiast would be an understatement. In fact, I eat, drink, and sleep technology. I have won a number of hackathons, and one of my biggest aspirations in life is to build my own tech firm to solve worldwide problems. But until then, I want to be part of this world of technology and spread the word to as many aspirants and laymen as possible. So, allow me to welcome you all to my podcast, Tech Titans, a place where we discuss different tech related topics and how old and new technologies are helping change the face of world. Since I was a child, I've loved every kind of computer and video games. I cannot forget the countless hours I've spent helping Super Mario save the princess or defusing bombs in Counter-Strike. It kept me engaged for hours, and needless to say, was my first brush with technology. But now, games are no longer just a form of entertainment. With the advent of technology, gamification is on the rise. A superb phenomena which uses core value of games in different ways to play, teach, learn, entertain, operate, and many other things. Now, the core aspects of gaming are being employed in varied fields from protein research to education, making these tasks as fun as games themselves. Some entrepreneurial minds have taken these concepts to new heights of fun with benefits. And I'm going to talk to one such creator who is making revolutionary progress in the field. Please welcome Matthew Dunstan, a Cambridge researcher by day and game designer by night. Today, we are going to discuss the wondrous concept of gamification and how it is changing the technological sphere. Welcome to the show, Matthew. Please tell our listeners a bit about yourself.
Thanks very much for having me, Ayush. Very pleasure to be on. Yeah, so my name is Matthew Dunstan. I'm a researcher at the University of Cambridge. I did my PhD in Cambridge, although I'm originally Australian and grew up there. And yeah, so my research is in materials chemistry. I work in a lab that develops new materials for batteries, for carbon capture, for fuel cells, for these kind of technologies, and then tries to understand how they function. And also, that started around the time I was doing my PhD. I also got into designing games, specifically tabletop games, so analog physical games. But that's also branched out over the years to both commercial games, to educational games, to experiences like escape rooms, and even some digital games. I'm working on an app now. Yeah, so that's basically me.
Fantastic. I am in good company. I just love this whole dynamic of yours research, gamification, game development. It is good to have you on the show. And I cannot tell you how happy I am to have you as my first ever guest.
Oh, it's a
Let's
pleasure.
talk
Thank you.
let's talk about games. What according to you are the best games designed so far and how have they helped change the face of gaming?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a difficult question because I mean games are such a broad field. I mean, in some ways, one answer to that question is looking at games such as Mandala or chess, these sort of more ancient games. I mean, the fact of anything, I mean, a game or any other kind of cultural artifact, existing and not only existing but persisting for thousands of years. There aren't many things that have lasted so long that have such a place in a cultural way. The thing that we could play, Mandala the same way it was played, over 3,000, 4,000 years ago. I mean, that's quite a unique kind of property of games. And so in some ways, I think that's one example of the best kind of games. I mean, on the other hand, I think, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, one thing I think of is something like Pokemon Go. I think of the recent things, I think it showed what is possible with the emergence of new technology from Niantic, from some Google mapping kind of technology, and how that can create a phenomenon that kind of escapes the world that games are normally confined to. I think we're both in that world. We're both the aficionados of games, but I think Pokemon Go kind of broke out of that world and became sort of part of the public consciousness. So in another way, I think that. But to be honest, I think I prefer to think of what are great games rather than what are the best games, because I think for different purposes there are great games.
I agree. Every game like serves the purpose it had been made for. Chess, I guess, is one of the longest lasting game, and it's still like the discussion topic over many people every day, and it's being played as a competitive sports nowadays as well. So that's really fascinating. And Pokemon Go as well, I think it really showed us what we could achieve with gaming and this whole mixing of technology, games, such a traditional concept of taking a television show which is loved by all, taking a game franchise and mixing new technology to coming up with such a mind-blowing game. It
Yeah, and
was.
not just it's not just a game; it's an experience. I mean, I'm not sure if you experienced it in India, but when I was in England at the time, and yeah, you would be walking around at 10 o'clock in the evening, and there would be huge groups of people out. You know, this was in the kind of like the week that it was released, when it was sort of the peak thing. But you know, there's like, forget about games like that. There haven't been experiences like that really. So yeah, I think that was the power of what they created.
Yeah, even me and all of my friends, like we were out on the streets catching Pokemons. It's like, so it brought the whole community together, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it has really in a way changed the face of gaming. Like earlier we used to think of it as very dynamic, like games are games, but now for us games are tools to socialize, games are tools to accelerate research, and that is what really fascinates me. So, 10 years ago, flight simulators were state-of-the-art simulations used to train Air Force pilots. But now even I can install and run flight simulators of almost the same potential. So, Matthew, how do you think technologies like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and augmented reality will affect science research and education in the near future? And do you think games can act as a catalyst to the process? Just like we talked about, Pokemon made use of augmented reality to power the whole game. Do you think we can bring the same thing to science research and education? And maybe games can act as a way to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's again, it's a big question, because you know, when you think about science and education, there's such huge fields. But I think the thing is that games are often the innovators in kind of developing and in using these new technologies. Certainly, most of the virtual reality, or at least the kind of most developed virtual reality, is in the gaming space. If you look at things like Oculus Rift, augmented reality, as you said, with Pokemon Go and other things, has also found its place. I mean, and when we're talking about augmented reality, I mean, you know, it's not just things. You know, augmented reality in a way is quite old in games. There was an old game in the UK called Perplexity, which I'd encourage you to look up. It was from the early 2000s. It was a trading card game, but there were puzzles, and these puzzles played into a broader world. And actually, there was an actual physical prize hidden somewhere in the UK that the cards would point to. And so that was an idea, I mean, of augmented reality, or you know, shared kind of social reality within a game space. So I think games are often the forefront of pushing technologies and developing them, and then they get spread into other fields, into science and education. And we're seeing that already. For example, actually, my fiance runs a film museum here in the Czech Republic, and they're already employing augmented reality now to essentially animate exhibitions, to draw people's attention to certain aspects. Or if you have a machine such as a film camera, like augmented reality lets you actually look inside that machine and actually see how it functions, and you know, see the parts moving as you sort of look around and change your head. And that's incredibly powerful. But of course, that's built on, you know, earlier advances in technology. So I think these technologies, well, I mean, AI is a little bit separate, I would say. It's such a broad, I mean, artificial intelligence is such a broad topic and term, really. Obviously, machine learning is incredibly important in research already, sort of irregardless of how it was used in games, but is very important and will be important going forward. And virtual reality, augmented reality, I mean, we see it in things like medical sciences. You know, it makes a big difference. And I think I think they're very powerful for education. And I mean, we're going to get into talking about, games and education, but something that's always going to excite young people is using the latest technologies. That's part of drawing people in and really help, supplement the sort of educational material, get people interested in the first place.
Yeah, these technologies are like being first used by gaming, and now they've reached a point where they can branch out to other fields. Just as you said, there's like the forefront of virtual reality right now is games, but in the past, internet was just the forefront of US military. Now it's much broader tool. So it's like it starts from one place, it develops there, and then it branches out further. And I love the
Absolutely.
concept of the game in the UK where real pieces in the real world were connected to the game. If we think about it, going by definition, augmented reality does literally mean something that's flowing out of the screen, or I'll be any device, not even a screen. It's nowhere written that it should be digitized, flowing out of a virtual medium into the real world. And that really shows like how far the thinking for such a concept goes beyond what we perceive the concept as.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities that will be developed, I'm sure, in that space.
Okay, let's talk about your contributions to gaming now. You design games. Have you ever designed a game with a focus on learning and education?
Yeah, so I've been in the last 3 or 4 years. I've started working a little bit more in that field. I've worked quite closely with a colleague, Claire Murray, who is a scientist, was formerly a scientist at the Diamond Light Source in the UK. So that's a synchrotron where I had done some research during my PhD. And together with her and Mark Basham and other scientists at Diamond, we developed a board game about the synchrotron called Diamond, the board game, with the intention of distributing a physical board game to students in high schools in the UK. It has a couple of purposes. One is to educate students as to the nature of the science, the research that can be done at the synchrotron, the very broad nature of that. So it's from chemistry, biology, but also to things like history and heritage. So there are people looking up, dating various, archaeological objects or cultural objects using the synchrotron. And the other part of the game that was important was trying to give students, by playing the game, direct experience, or at least an idea of what it's like to actually be a scientist. What is it like to actually work as a scientist? We have a lot of images in popular culture or in our mind of what being a scientist is, but the kind of day-to-day or what is it like to go to a synchrotron and actually do an experiment? And so in playing the game, we're trying to give players that feeling of a little bit of risk, a little bit of collaboration, how important collaboration is in science, how you're trying to really push yourself hard to get the most data in a short period of time. And we use kind of quite simplified mechanisms that mean that anybody can play, but trying to give them that feeling. And I think that's the really crucial thing about games, but especially tabletop games. They're experiential. They put the player in the role. They cast them in a particular role and ask them to make decisions as if they were in that role. And I think that's so powerful in order to transfer, knowledge, but also insight into what a particular experience or task or job in the world is. And then, a few other, one other main thing I also did with Claire Murray was a pop-up escape room. So this was at the Dublin Maker Fest, and it ran for just one day. And essentially, it was called the Periodic Maze. So it was during the year of the International Year of the Periodic Table, and we were trying to educate sometimes quite young children. That's sort of the age group was sort of like 6 to 12 years old, about the periodic table. What does it actually mean? Because again, I think the periodic table is one of the most recognizable symbols of science in popular culture. I think most people, even if they don't really have any scientific background, they would recognize the periodic table. But how does that actually connect to reality? When you look at a little box and it says Fe, how do I connect that to something that's real and physical, like a nail or something that's made of iron? So we were trying to, first and foremost, just to connect like that very abstract notion of periodic table to reality, but also to highlight the other nice thing we're able to do through experience is to highlight an Irish crystallographer, female crystallographer called Helen McGaw, who was incredibly influential, but unfortunately much much like a lot of female scientists, is sort of not very well remembered in history. And so we were trying to highlight her contributions. She did things like she did some very seminal work on the structure of ice. So you might know that ice has many different crystal structures when it freezes. And she did some of the pioneering work during the 20th century into the structure of ice, some very early. A lot of people might know sort of the Braggs, for example, maybe, who were the developers of X-ray diffraction, but she was, very much in, colleagues of the Braggs, and it's not sort of remembered same degree. But anyway, so this experience, we try to use this escape room format, which has more sort of puzzles, and there's a little bit more of an open environment to get people to sort of experiment, to play, but also hopefully make connections between things in the real world and the periodic table. And yeah, I mean, it's, I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed sort of mixing my two, passions or areas of expertise, I guess. And I think, generally it's been quite effective. And there's many examples of this around the world. Like by far, the work I'm doing is not, I'm not the only person, combining games and education. And I'd also say, just as a sort of a bit of a shout out, I guess, to a professor, Scott Nicholson, who's based in Canada, and was based in the US for much of his career. He's done a lot of work on gamification in education, but also escape rooms for education. Has written some really interesting papers. He was behind the Red Bull escape room kind of global challenge. He does some really interesting work, and I'd encourage listeners to check out him as well.
Yeah, even the CEV Open team, which is building dictionaries and tools to gain inferences from bulk scientific literature, and which I'm proud to be working with, is trying to employ gamification to accelerate learning, and is developing the Aroma game, taking inspiration actually from one of your games.
That's true. Yeah. No, I'm also involved with OpenVirus sort of tangentially. We have a related project called Open Battery, which is trying to find electrochemical data from the literature. And with Peter Murray Rust, Peter's pushing a lot of it and working with others. But I think that we're, so trying to develop kind of experience to put people, again, to understand. I mean, this is a bit different, to understand it, really a digital experience, an algorithm. Or how do you understand how these programs are actually, automatically identifying and searching for particular topics in the literature? But how do you do that maybe with a group of participants who aren't coders, or they're not necessarily in computer science or these sort of fields, but they are very knowledgeable in other scientific aspects. So how do you sort of bridge the gap in expertise levels? And I think it'll be a really interesting experience, and I hope it'll go well.
I would also like to talk about Foldit, because I think when talking about gamification, Foldit is a topic we can't go without. It's generally the app people associate gamification with. So let's chat a bit about Foldit.
Yeah, I'll also throw, I guess the other one I would throw in is Galaxy Zoo. I think, alongside Foldit, I think those two were the first examples in this way. And I'd almost say still to this point, the most successful. I have to admit, it's slightly outside of my expertise, both in terms of the actual science and in terms of this idea of gamification. But maybe the first thing to talk about slightly is gamification, because we haven't really exactly addressed it necessarily. I think the thing about gamification, I mean, generally is using game-like mechanics to encourage certain behaviors or to encourage, a particular learning objective. For the case of Foldit at Galaxy Zoo, that's actually changed to a research objective. We need to perform these particular tasks in order to create, to get data or to analyze existing data. I think the key thing, in my opinion, about gamification, though, is that it needs to, it can't replace completely something that people are not interested at all about. You're not going to get, gamification is not going to change somebody's opinion to do something that they actively hate, or that they detest. It doesn't change opinions, but it can sort of smooth the way towards particular behaviors that you want to encourage. And maybe people know that it's a good thing to do, but they're not sort of engaged with, or it's not something they're reminded to do on sort of a daily basis or regularly. and of course points and leaderboards, things like that can sort of encourage various behaviors. As we've seen in the gaming world, that there's already a very precise science about how to control behavior through various rewards. If you look at the kind of free-to-play app games, there's a Candy Crush, for example. There's a very precise science about how do I met out my rewards over very particular time intervals to encourage, in that case, to encourage the people to pay the most money for the game. But for education, it would be how do I structure my game so that I get people participating as often as I can. And I think the key actual discovery, in a way, of Folded and Galaxy Zoo is that how much an average citizen is interested in science and does want to contribute to a great research effort. They want to contribute meaningfully beyond just reading about science or looking at popular science books or things like that. They want to get involved themselves. They want to be involved in the research, and they're happy to kind of like take their gloves off and get into the thick of it. The kind of the complexities, and things like Folded and Galaxy Zoo allowed them to. It gave the gamification gave people a very easy way into that experience, and then they kept those who kept going and playing. That's both a case of the well-designed game part of it, but also I think it speaks to their interest that already existed or was sort of ignited in science and in scientific research through the game. So I think when we talk about gamification, we shouldn't forget that it's sometimes it's harnessing something that it's usually harnessing something that's already in its participants. In the case of your financial literacy app, I think I'm sure a lot of young people are actually very interested in money. They are interested in investing and understanding how they become wealthy, or how they can manage things like taxes or things like that. It's not that they're completely disinterested or not, but they just don't have an easy way into that. Their behavior isn't set in such a way that they will keep acquiring knowledge or they'll keep engaging with that topic necessarily in their day-to-day lives. And through gamification, like your app, it means that gives them both that easy way into the topic, and also kind of gives them the incentives to keep coming back and keep learning. Obviously, the on that scale is something like school, like formal education. That in a way, makes its participants, develop kind of learned behaviors. Like you go to school every day and you expect that you're going to sit in classes and you are used to acquiring knowledge, and whether that's effective or not, it kind of trains that behavior in its students. And gamification and apps, that's just a different approach to that same idea. It's how do I reward somebody to keep coming back each day? School, you're kind of forced to go, but can you do it in a different way? And so I think Folded and Galaxy Zoo did a great job in allowing people to encourage citizen science. I think that's an amazing thing, and it has it's opened up the field for lots of different efforts along that way.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said. Gamification won't. So if you like actively hate a thing or are generally disinterested in it, gamification won't act as a motivator for you to join it. So citizens who were generally interested in science were the ones who played Folded, and the ones who really took out their time to try to build protein molecules. If I'm from a business field, I know nothing about science. I think generally Folded won't be a thing that interests me. It would incite my brain, but it wouldn't be a thing I would actively contribute to. And again, Candy Crush is a great example of how games affect behaviors, and the point you made about schools generally making us a schedule. Like I've seen people play Candy Crush on such a religious level. They're like, every half an hour I have to collect those points, and I have to like uh, do the levels and complete those, and I want to compete with my friends. It's if you think about it, if we employ the same kind of idea to better fields instead of Candy Crush, um, like education, trying to employ the same kind of behavior science, trying to make users come back every time they want to play, they'll actually be doing science or learning. I think Khan
Yeah,
Academy is really the one which is dipping a lot on this technology. It basically gives you the same leaderboard experience. It gives you points, it gives you daily check-ins. Even I, while preparing for an exam, used it actively. And this whole process of learning for that exam became more like a game. Like, people think that this app will act like a game, and they generally just talk about it. I really felt that it was a game at a certain point, because what I used to do is I used to get on a call with friends, and we used to solve the questions together, and every question you solve gives you 5 points, and those points add up to unlock other questions. So I was generally asking my friends, which level are you on, and which level is that friend on, and how I can boost my points. And this whole Khan Academy took the whole concept of behavioral science and gaming and combined that to really accelerate learning. And this is really a very good real world example, because even I was motivated to study more for a test that was a bit out of what I generally do.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's you're reminded of the quote, with great power comes great responsibility. I think it is, in a way, it's even scary how much how a well-designed game can exert over behavior, as you talked about your friends with Candy Crush. And I just hope, as the field goes on, is that that those because, make no mistake, these same behavior things are going to go into the commercial world. They're going to be to train consumer behavior and things like this, and already are. So I just hope, and I hope, especially in, say, in educational citizen science, that kind of those addictive qualities, which I'd say are the more kind of pernicious parts of that, I would hope that they would be more harnessed to instate curiosity, or like depth of learning, and love of a particular topic. As academics do in some way. That's in some ways they're kind of addicted to learning about a particular field, and I would just hope that that these efforts would be just mindful of that, mindful of not creating addiction for the sake of feeding into a platform, or feeding activity within a platform, but rather using that kind of addictive quality, but towards real education and real learning and growth, and to just be mindful of that, I would say.
Yeah, I guess this is there's one side, there's two sides to every coin. This is generally the more negative side, the addictive part of gaming. In India, there's like this really famous game called Players Unknown Battleground, their mobile version. It, I think, really hit all the right spots when it comes to making a game more addictive. And they even had a separate team for behavioral science. I think I read it somewhere that they had this whole team which designs how should we make the game more incentivized for the users to play. And it was so addictive to the point where the Indian government had to actually ban the game for a certain period. There were data threats as well, but the main reason was that it's becoming too addictive for some people, and children were skipping their classes to play the game.
Oh wow, I hadn't heard of that. Yeah, it's true, and yeah, you're absolutely right. These companies, they do have teams. They do. I remember. I'm now forgetting the name of the company that makes Candy Crush. It's King, maybe it's King something. Anyway, I remember they were at a Cambridge recruiting fair, for example, for looking at graduates who are going to work in data sciences, essentially, to try and make the most of the huge amounts of data that they have, and how they can then use that to further, refine their experience. So, of course, yeah, as you said, there's two sides to every coin, and actually, the information that they're gaining is in some ways very powerful. You're getting a very powerful insight into the human psyche. It's just how you use that. And as for the example of the game in India, yeah, it can have very, very different, bad consequences. I mean, and I guess on the other, or you could have something like Pokemon Go, which, yes, in some ways was quite addictive, but I think it led to a generally pretty positive community experience. Because it was about bringing people together in a physical space. It wasn't about being solitary, with your phone or something like that. So yeah. Anyway, it's it's such a huge topic, and it's far beyond what you could have in a even an hour conversation. But It's always interesting, and hopefully more people, I think, just question, why is something working this way, especially as we start to use it in science and education.
Yeah, I completely agree. Citizens often overlook the importance of their data and how their behavior is being manipulated by games, and why apps are requiring permissions. I mean, this is a bit off topic, but I think that's generally what users should be sensitized about. Like if an app is requiring your location when it has nothing to do with location, why is it requiring location in the first place? And how is it using your data? I mean, there was a case 4 or 5 months ago where an app which is used to remind Islamic people about their daily prayers, it was selling its data to the U.S. government indirectly. So I mean that's also a very valid point. Citizens should be sensitized about their data and their security, how their behavior is being manipulated. To be honest, this is one of the reasons I started this podcast, to generally bring and divert more attention towards these topics.
Yeah, I mean, you should definitely. I mean, I don't know what your plans are, but definitely, if you could find someone talking about, cybersecurity and I think that'd be a very interesting topic to talk about. And yeah, considering that we're all connected to our smartphones and just seeing how ubiquitous that is, but realizing again, what you're kind of selling by using that.
So, coming to almost the end segment of the podcast, I think it's easy to think about employing gamification to fields, but it's much harder to actually come up with concepts that drive this process. I mean, simply adding points won't make boring things interesting. Even tests have points and they sort of are boring. So, how can students like me and teachers employ concepts of games to empower learning?
Yeah, I mean, you make a very good point that, as we said, adding adding points is not going to change somebody's experience, and it's not going to teach them anything.
Yeah.
It's just going to teach people to game the system realistically. I think it ultimately comes down to realizing what can games do beyond other forms of education, because of course it's one tool amongst a whole lot of tools that educators can make. And I come back to what I said before, that games give their participants the ability to directly make decisions and to be placed in a role and experience what that's like. That's the most powerful thing about games. And unlike some other educational aspects, or when you think about doing a test, the nice thing about games is it often done well, it can connect educational concepts or knowledge to real world consequences or situations. It allows you to feel like that there's a practical component to what you're learning, and really understanding like why is this important? Well, actually the game can tell you, because it can put you straight into a situation where, with that knowledge that you've just learned, that will help you make a better decision. With your financial app, now that you've learned about investing, well, when you learn about inflation, now you'll if I give you this amount of virtual currency, you can make positive decisions in order to make sure to sort of maximize the wealth of that. And it also allows, I think, because it's experiential, it also allows people to make mistakes. I think the thing, because there's a lot of educational power in making a mistake and then understanding, what were the consequences of that mistake? Maybe how did you misapply your knowledge to make that decision, or what went into making that particular decision, or making that particular application of knowledge. Unfortunately, in education generally, there's generally not much of an idea of failing. You're very much encouraged not to fail. You're encouraged that there is only that there's one answer, and you just have to get that answer, and you should always be trying to do that first time. Games, because they're a little bit closer to real life experiences, sometimes in games there is no one right answer. It depends what the other players are doing or how you're interacting with each other. And it's natural that in different parts of the games that, in every game, there's always going to be, well, if it's a competitive game, there'll always be a winner and there'll always be a loser. But it's perfectly fine to be a loser. That's not, it's not a judgment call. That's just part of the structure of the game. And there's things to be learned in that experience. And I'd say that's also kind of a powerful, I mean, that's a bit more of a general point about games, but because it allows you to try things and possibly fail. In the synchrotron game, the Diamond the board game, players do experiments, and their experiments can fail sometimes. And they don't get as much advancement towards particular scientific projects. But that's normal. You're going to fail at least once or twice during the game. It's usually going to happen. You can't control it. It's you can have some control. You can choose how much risk you're going to take on when you're doing your experiment, but ultimately it's out of your hands. And a lot of participants who came out of the game, we gathered a lot of sort of responses from people who played, and we asked them some questions before and after. And one thing that came out of it is that they realized that failing is normal as a scientist. Like, scientists fail a lot. And I think that actually was an incredibly powerful thing to come out of that experience, that people realized that scientists aren't these sort of perfect beings in white coats that, think up amazing theories and develop amazing technologies. That does happen sometimes, but the journey towards that involves a lot of failure. And if you want to be a scientist, you have to realize that's just normal. It's not a judgment on you as a person or as a scientist. That's just part of the job. And games, and because, again, you were experiencing that role directly, and you were making choices, and you could feel the failure. You experienced the failure as part of the game. You weren't told about it in a class. You weren't told, oh, scientists will fail sometimes. That's very different to, I was a scientist in the game and I failed. It has a different impact on people. So I think that's, as long as educators remember that those strengths, so play to the strengths of what games can do, and I think you'll have the best chance. And of course, that is just one part of the many tools. I would never say that games should be the only thing that you use to teach a topic, but it's a great way to diversify how you're learning about something.
Definitely. Actually, a few months back, I learned about the thought experiment. Let's say you have a keypad and you have a test, and you have to press keys which are laid out on the test. You'll be very demotivated to type out 50 characters which are in front of you. And if you fail, there's hardly any reason, any motivation for you to try again. Now just replace that keypad with a controller, and change the whole test paper to Super Mario. I mean, in Super Mario, if you follow a sequence, it'll lead you to winning. And even if you lose, the next time you play, you'll be more motivated. You'll not be like, I lost. You'll be like, I have to save the princess. How should I go about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a slightly different thing too, in that that's towards completing a particular task. And I think, the trick is just also to not forget that it helps you complete tasks, but also potentially to develop knowledge and to develop experiences, and hopefully you can do all of those things.
Phenomenal. I think technology will, like it always have been, complement research and science, and games can and will become a strong medium in this whole relationship. With this, I would like to end this episode. It was a great pleasure talking to you, Matthew. You can catch Matthew on his live streams at twitch.tv/mtdunstan. You can also read more about Aroma Game and FinLearn at techaffair.in/ttp. That is techaffair.in/ttp.
No, thanks very much, Ayush. It's been a pleasure. And I should say, if anyone wants to ever ask me, I'm also on Twitter a lot. I'm at wisegoldfish, or one word. That's where I'm normally at. So yeah, thanks very much. It was great to chat with you.
Thank you, my listeners. I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as I have. Let's continue on this fascinating journey of technology with Tech Titan. In my next episode, I'll be talking about data science and how we can make good use of these numbers for betterment of the individual and the society. See you again.